I've worked in career services in a variety of roles for over 18 years now. So feel free to drop in any sort of questions that you have via the Q&A or the chat. I'm pretty flexible in that regard. I'm happy to share any insights with you. All right, so today we're going to talk about that commonly accepted or appropriate behavior for in-person interactions. First, we're going to start there, whether it's career fairs, interviews, networking. So again, any sort of professional setting like that. Then we're going to go through some of those online etiquette things that we need to be thinking about when we're communicating, whether it's email, over the phone, like video calls, or maybe social media. And lastly, we're going to talk on some general professional etiquette that I think is important for you to know that could impact you not only during your job search, but as you transition into that first full-time position. So, and here are our learning objectives, of course, for today. So let's jump into in-person. So when it comes to career fairs, you have a very, very short period of time to make an impression. I've often been asked by students in the past, what's the value of a career fair? I can only talk to someone, very briefly. Does it make a difference? Why don't I just go and apply online? And what I've consistently heard over the years from employers is that, they may have dozens, if not hundreds of applications to look through, but not all of those applicants will show that initiative and effort to come visit them at their particular booth. So it is a way to get noticed and you may get shortlisted. So I know of some recruiters who even have different types of tracking systems, scoring systems, if you will, in the background, and they actually prioritize people that come and talk to them. But with the career fair, there's some things that you need to be aware of to make sure that you're not accidentally doing some things that could hold you back. So the basics, of course, apply not only for career fairs, but for interviews as well. Smiling, looking enthusiastic to be there. Make sure when you introduce yourself, you're saying your first and last name, you're thinking through the content that you're sharing with them, always reflecting on what the audience may be most interested in learning about you. Big thing, do not go to a career fair and ask what somebody's hiring for. Reason being that employers believe, like I do, just Google it. If you're not sure what they're hiring for, Google it, search for it. And if you still don't find anything, you need to share that, I looked on CareerBuzz before going to the career fair, or I looked on your company job board and it wasn't quite clear, what types of positions you were hiring for tied to, my areas of interest or study. Could you tell me more about that? That's better than just walking up to a booth and saying, so what are you hiring for? The first impression you leave on an employer when you do that is that you lacked initiative to try to find the information. And again, it's a little bit exhausting for an employer to have the same conversation over and over. So that's really, really big in terms of etiquette for career fairs. You are not going to have a lot of time to talk to people. So the more you put thought and effort into the questions you're going to ask, excuse me, and the conversation you would like to have, the better. Make sure that you're not holding up the recruiter. Sometimes I'll walk around the room and I'll see some recruiters going like nodding kind of fast, trying to help communicate with their body language that, hey, we need to wrap up this conversation because there may be dozens of students behind you waiting to talk to that recruiter. So in reality, you may have 2 to 5 minutes or so, depending with the employer if lines are long. But if the lines aren't long and you're having a great conversation, don't feel like you need to cut it off. Again, you have to really hone in on that body language. Be sure that you thank them for their time after the conversation. Make sure you leave the conversation understanding what you're supposed to do next, or are they going to contact you via, the information you shared on your resume? Do you need to apply online? Many will tell you that. And it's for organizational purposes and legal purposes. They ask you to do that. So don't feel like they're dismissing you if they say go and apply online. If you can and you get that contact info, be sure to send a thank you note and make sure that it's customized to who you talk to. So drop in some information about what you talked about, because again, put yourself in that person's shoes. They're talking with dozens of people in that day, and it's really tiring and it's hard to keep the faces and names and conversations straight. So dropping in, I really enjoyed you sharing about your experience doing A, B, or C at the company. That sounds really innovative and it aligns with, my values and the type of work I want to do in the future. Thank you again for speaking with me today. Doesn't have to be huge. Something else that you should also be aware of, and sometimes I get this question from students, where they'll send a message and say, thank you so much. I really enjoyed meeting you. And they'll say, I didn't hear back. And my response is, it's not a message that requires a response back. And most people don't say, you're welcome for thanking me. Does that make sense? So Don't feel like you're not hearing any responses back because you aren't being considered or you're doing something wrong. It's just not a message that requires a response. Okay. So if you want to engage in a conversation, you need to have a question or a reason for somebody to follow up with you. The other thing that I think is interesting is, sometimes you'll hear the advice that once you go to a career fair, right after, you should add somebody on LinkedIn. And I'll just share with you in my experience that each recruiter feels differently. Okay. So I was just talking with a recruiter about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And she said to me, Laura, what are people telling these students? I left the career fair and I got 75 connection notices. I don't know any of these folks. They should really, focus on applying online, networking, talking to other people in my company. I said, okay, that's interesting feedback. But I've heard from other recruiters that say, please follow up and connect with me. It helps me put the face in the name. As I'm looking through the applications, I can remember you better. So if you are going to follow up via LinkedIn and connect, there's an option for you to write a note. It's pretty limited, I think about 200 characters that you can write, but it is worth your time. If you plan to connect via LinkedIn after your conversation, state why you're doing that. Like, it was so great seeing you at the career fair at Georgia Tech. Thanks for sharing more about blank aspects of the position. I hope to connect with you. That's it. Okay, so again, that's okay for you to do for the most part, but just know that there are some varying opinions out there. Okay, so real quickly, I'd like to see if I can launch a poll for us because I'm curious to see what you all think. Hold on one second. All right. Let's see. Hopefully you all can see this. So networking. What do you think is the recommended space between two people in terms of standing apart? Okay. So there are varying opinions on this, and culturally there are differences there. But thinking within the US context, what do you think is the recommended distance? We got about 50% of folks who have participated, so I'll wait a couple more seconds. Okay, so we've got about 75%, so we'll go ahead and stop there. All right. So overall, I would say about 75% of you all said 3 feet. Some of you all, a foot and a half, some folks 7 feet. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so in general, you want to stay about 3 feet away from people, in particular in crowded settings. I do notice culturally that some cultures will like to speak more closely, or there's a little bit more distance, but you want to be sure you're keeping at least like an arm's length away from an individual, just again for personal space and just making sure that people feel comfortable. So a tip that I recommend is also just, again, there's results just in case if you want to see it. If you've got to pay attention to body language. So if somebody's leaning back or kind of leaning away, really pay attention to that. Okay. Basically, what they're trying to communicate with you in a kind sort of manner is that they just need a little bit more personal space in order to continue the conversation. Okay. So keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit about, now that we've talked about career fairs often feed very quickly into the interview. So let's talk about the interview. We're going to talk about before the interview, during the interview, and after. And some of it bleeds over between all the stages. So before the interview, I do encourage for students to network with Georgia Tech alumni that are currently working at that particular department. The reason why I say do that versus HR is that somebody in HR is going to hire you, and they are bound to make sure that they are being as fair as possible during the interview process. So they can't talk with you and potentially share interview questions or anything like that. So you're more likely to get insights from current employees, and a couple of things to just be aware of that can go on behind the curtain, if you will. All right. So for many organizations, they may give a referral bonus. Say if somebody that currently works in the organization successfully refers somebody in. So sometimes there's a financial incentive there. Also, there's some things that you may never really know. If you have like a 10 to 15 minute conversation with a Georgia Tech alum and you're asking great questions and they think, wow, this student is really sharp, we should hire them. They may go and say something to HR. So you may be able to influence how you are perceived overall by talking to people. And at minimum, if you're talking to people in the organization and you're learning more, the more you know going into an interview, the better your interview responses may be, or you may have a better sense of the culture, what would be appropriate. The one thing I would say with that is do not ask for somebody to share the interview questions with you. Okay, because that's just, again, not ethical. You're putting somebody in a difficult situation. So what you can do is ask for advice. What advice would you give to me? I want to be sure that I'm communicating, you know, the right information to my interviewer so they can evaluate my candidacy. Do you have any advice on what I should really focus on or prepare to make sure I do the best I possibly can? That's an appropriate question. So, anywho, that's kind of it with that. You are expected that you have reviewed the website and know the baseline information about the company. Okay, so review current news, understand the products or services that they provide. You may also want to look into the competitors. Again, you've got to familiarize yourself with the organization. And I do encourage you to download job descriptions because once the posting closes, many times you can't, pull them back, if you will. And the job description is a really great guide for your preparation. So they'll tell you in the job description, we want these qualities, et cetera. So that can help you reflect and start thinking about, what stories may be best to communicate that particular skill set. Do think about your attire. Attire is important. And I talk about professional attire just because depending on the particular organization, some may lean towards more formal, some may lean more towards casual. But personally, what I recommend is just dress a little bit better than whatever that cultural norm is. It's far better for you to go into a situation a little bit overdressed than underdressed. But you also have to, again, respect some cultural norms within different industries. So I would say the most conservative dress would be like investment banking, finance, consulting. Those types of folks, many of them will wear like a full business suit. But think of your like tech companies, your startups. You kind of have to really assess that. Maybe that's a good question to ask a Georgia Tech alum, if you're doing an informational interview. Like if they recommend that you do, wear a suit, or would it be more appropriate for business casual? Because there are some tech firms that if you show up in a suit, you may not be perceived very positively, for example. So also be honest, of course, with anything that you're sharing. Don't exaggerate or make things up because you never know when an employer may follow up and you don't really have something to say. But really, when it comes to, the etiquette components before the interview, is you will show respect and you will leave a very, very positive impression with your employers by preparation alone. So thinking through your background, coming up with star stories to reflect different qualities that they're looking for, preparing thoughtful questions. This is a big one. If they ever say, do you have any questions for me? And you say no, that may be a deal breaker for a lot of employers. To them, they receive that as you're not really interested in the position and you didn't prepare, because you've got to keep in mind that during an interview or during any step within the job search process, the purpose is that they have to narrow down this large pool and select the best candidate. So you don't want to give them any reason at all to think that you may have some pieces that don't align well with their culture. So again, just be very mindful of that. Incorporate that research and also come prepared, because if you show up to an interview, you don't have pen and paper, you don't have your resumes with you, you don't have a nice padfolio. These are just perceptions, conscious or unconscious, that people may have of you just showed up, you don't really have anything with you, or I'm telling you some information, you're like, oh, can I have a pen? You go, I really keep in mind that with interviews, employers are assuming this is the best behavior that you can exhibit. You're on your best behavior, right? So if you can't even bring a pen to an interview, how am I going to put you in front of my clients, my customers? Okay, so just keep that in mind. So here are some examples of attire that you could consider, all the way from business professional down to casual. Again, it's a judgment call, right? You have to think about the industry, think about the norms within that particular field, because some may be much, much more formal, some more casual, but again, dress just a little bit more nicely than perhaps your average employee. And the reason why you should do that is it just shows that you are eager to make a good first impression. You're showing that courtesy that you put forth effort. So again, there are several assumptions that may be made based on, again, just being polished. That doesn't mean that you can't show off your style or uniqueness or anything like that. But in general, you want for people to focus on what you're saying, not that you're wearing a rainbow cowboy hat. True story. I saw that at a career fair, and a student thought that's going to be the thing that gets me noticed. And they were right, but not noticed in a good way. So again, be noticed for the content of your answers. Don't be noticed for your attire because it's distracting. Okay. So make sure no matter what you wear, please do not wear overly revealing clothing, anything that's distracting. Like, I didn't realize this, but evidently there's a trend for dirty shoes. So anything that looks like dirty, sweatpants, hats, flip-flops, tank top, again, like beachwear, super comfortable sort of things, probably will not be well received. Okay, so keep that in mind, unless if maybe you're interviewing with a fashion house or some sort of brand like that. So during the interview, this is important. Show up to the location about 20 to 30 minutes early. That doesn't mean check in 20 to 30 minutes early. And I say that just because there may be traffic, you may be confused. They may have given you great directions, but it took a long time for you to find a spot in the parking garage, right? So there are many different things that could delay the time in which you think you're going to be able to get to the front desk. And if you come running up to the front desk with 2 minutes to spare, many employers are already going, I don't even want to continue with this interview because you didn't even seem like you were interested enough to show up early enough to be relaxed, prepared to engage in this conversation. I will say, though, there are some times in life where you just can't predict something. Maybe there's an accident or something else that happens. If you know you're going to be late or delayed in any way, shape, or form, you need to call immediately and notify them that you're going to be late. Otherwise, they're going to assume that you're no-showing. And again, you may have lost that opportunity. I once worked with a previous student who shared a really interesting story with me. And she flew up to Connecticut to meet with a really, top 50 brand for a particular role. And she shared, it was so amazing, Laura. I got off the plane and they actually had a limo pull up and take me to the hotel. But what was interesting was the next day. So I leave the hotel, I go into the lobby, check in with the receptionist, and the person that takes me back to do my interview was actually a limo driver. Turns out that this organization was very big on culture, specifically around treating everybody the same, not having like hierarchy, if you will. And what she shared is that there were actually some students that were sent home before the interviews even started because of the way they treated the limo driver, who was a high-level executive in that respected in that particular firm, because he wanted to see, how do these people act not in an interview setting? Okay, how do they treat people in their day-to-day lives? So just understand that everything you do, once you get into that environment, people are drawing analogies between it. So if you're scrolling on your phone, you're looking impatient, you're like, how long is this going to take? They're going, wow, that's the best behavior that you can possibly exhibit. Think about how much worse it's going to be when it's not a high stakes, sort of situation like an interview. So keep that in mind. Please make sure you put your phone on silent. Don't be looking at it. Don't have it on your desk to where every time that text messages pop up or messages, you're sitting there looking at your phone. Wear a watch so that way you can subtly look, down, make sure you're on time and there aren't any issues there. So please make sure you don't have your phone with constant pop-ups or anything like that. One thing that could occur, I have known of some students who maybe have a family member who may have a health condition, and there might be some sort of emergency call or something like that. If that's the case, just notify the employer and say, hey, I'm so sorry, but I actually have to leave my ringer on. My mother's in the hospital right now. I'm waiting to hear from a doctor or something. So I hope you'll accept if I have to step away for a moment to take that call. Again, perfectly acceptable. It's all about communication, so people understand why you may act a little bit differently than, the expected norm. So it is okay for you to share with an employer if you have another offer. I think there's a concern that's often expressed to me, by students, like, should I tell someone if I have an offer? Yes. And the reason why you should tell other employers that you have an offer is that they may be able to speed up the interview timeline for you. Sometimes it can even create more desirability of you as a candidate if they know other people are trying to actively hire you. So just be aware of that. But if you get an offer, even if you don't get an offer yet, I do make sure to encourage students, don't talk about salary unless if they bring it up. And if they bring up salary, make sure that you are prepared before, again, that conversation ever happens. By that, I mean, you should know the average market value for that position. So you can look up average salaries on glassdoor.com, salary.com. You can look at what Georgia Tech students were offered in the past. If you go to the Career Center website, career.govtech.edu, you'll see a tab that says Career Education. We have a career and salary survey employment report where you can actually see real salaries that were offered to students in the past, from co-ops and internships to full-time positions for all degree levels, from PhD students, masters, down to undergraduate students. So just be aware of that. You do want to reflect appropriately the way in which they're communicating with you. And I say that because this is a trap, okay, for some organizations where they may be super casual, like, so tell me about your day, how's the week? You're slouching back, whatever, because they have the job. Okay, you don't have the job. So you want to be friendly and warm if they're being friendly and warm, but they're not your friend. Okay. So you want to be friendly, but don't overshare. Don't share too much personal information unless if they ask you things like, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? By all means, share, authentic and genuine information there, but don't volunteer personal, kind of overly casual information. All right. So after the interview is over, and this is a big one, you need to send an email thank you note in 48 hours or less. Usually I recommend 24 to 48 specifically, because I've seen some students write a thank you note, like as they're in the lobby, and at the end of the interview, they actually drop it off at the front desk. And the impression that's left by some individuals when you do that is that you didn't take time to reflect on the conversation, and what you're doing is performative in nature. You're just doing it to get a checkbox. You're not really thankful. You're just, again. So I would say it actually hurts you more than helps you doing that. Or if you leave 5 minutes later and you're writing a note, again, I personally recommend wait just a little bit longer so you have time to reflect and give a more meaningful thank you note. Include some specifics about what you particularly appreciated about that interaction. Make sure that you also respect that hiring timeline. That's a great question to ask at the end of the interview. What does the hiring timeline look like for this position? If they say they're going to get to you by next week, don't contact them, before that next week saying, what's my status? Because what the impression that will be left is that you don't listen, or you're impatient, you're overeager, okay? But it is okay for you to follow up and ask, after that deadline passed, to say, can you tell me the status of the search and if I'm still being considered? Because you never know the world, what may happen. There may be a delay in the search. People may be out of the office. Many things can happen. So it's better to follow up instead of making assumptions. Okay. Now, as you exit your interview and you're going to the parking lot, I've seen this too. Don't suddenly get on your phone and be like, oh yeah, this is what happened in the interview. I got asked, this hard question, and, but I didn't really know about this person, how they were interacting with me. It's like, again, everybody around you, you don't know who they are, what they're hearing. So keep that in mind. Don't talk about it until you're in a private setting. And two other things that I do recommend: if you're getting an offer, please, please, please do one of two things, or well, three now. Accept the offer if you want to, or ask for time to consider it, and then follow up. If you don't want the job offer, decline it, please. And the reason why I say that is that your peers are looking for jobs, okay? So if you do not accept a job, they could receive an offer if you do it in an appropriate time frame. If you just collect job offers like they're candy, and then it comes to April and you pick 1 out of the 10 job offers, you took jobs away from 9 other people. And I really want for you to take that to heart, because, again, it can be a tight economy sometimes and difficult to secure position. So please make sure that you're being ethical in your search. And if you accept an offer, please honor that offer. I know there are some unique circumstances where folks accept and can no longer honor that. The key is just, again, communicating and communicating in a timely manner. If you need to talk through any unique situations, Career Center has drop-in hours 1 to 3, Monday through Friday. So check out that information on our website, or you can schedule an appointment as well. And if you do get rejected for any reason from a job offer, I encourage you to ask for feedback and advice for a couple different reasons. Now, some employers, due to internal HR policies, cannot provide you feedback, but sometimes they can. And if they can't provide feedback, they may tell you information that you never would have picked up on otherwise. Like maybe it's just this little thing that, they wish you would have emphasized this particular aspect of this interview question, or there was some other thing that's very correctable, but you won't know how to get better if you don't, again, take that time to really ask for that feedback. All right, so let me launch another poll. We're going to talk about AI, okay? So real quick, let me get that up. All right, sorry, let me go back. It always takes me just a minute. Okay, so here we go. Is it okay to leverage AI for interviewing? What do you all think? Yes, always, sometimes, no, be authentic. All right, we've got about 60% of folks have weighed in. All right, take a couple more seconds. All right, I think we've got most of the folks who are going to participate. So let me share that so you can see that now. Hopefully it's on your screen. So nobody said yes always. So I find that pretty interesting. I am in agreement with you. So it was kind of split about 60-40. Folks saying sometimes it's okay to leverage AI for interviews. Some saying no, be authentic. And here's my 2 cents. Both probably B and C are right. Okay. But I can't tell you how many times now that I have heard from employers that they are doing like video interviews, and they'll ask a question. There's a long pause from the student, and they're like, can you ask that again? And then next thing they know, they start seeing the student looking off the screen and reading from a teleprompter. I don't even know how you do that. But you got to keep in mind that when you're interviewing with someone, you're not going to have somebody spit out an answer for you and then you have a conversation. This may sound a little bit ridiculous, but this has happened multiple times with Georgia Tech students. So I'm trying to spread the word. Please never do that. There's not been a single case that I'm aware of where an employer said, oh, that was a really great, innovative idea. I'm going to hire that student. The general perception is this student can't have a basic conversation. They can't give authentic answer, so I'll go forward with another candidate. So, but with that being said, don't use it during an interview, but you can use AI to prep in a lot of great different ways. So it's perfectly okay for you to do that, but AI can hallucinate. It can make up information. So if you're trying to work on your star stories or work on your interview responses, don't just say things that you think people want to hear or that AI spits out to you, okay? Because what's actually kind of interesting is I'm hearing of more employers that are trying to do different initiatives on campus, whether it's participating in a career fair, hosting an info session, getting involved with student clubs, maybe like case studies, hackathons, that sort of thing. And the reason why they're doing that is they're almost getting flooded with so much like AI, students leveraging AI in kind of awkward ways, or they may create these beautiful, awesome resumes, but if all of the resumes now look the same, how do you actually pick candidates? So I'm hearing from more employers, they're trying to do things on campus because they want to see who are those folks that have those essential skill sets like communication, building rapport, networking, that can talk on the spot, that can do A, B, or C, right? So authenticity, I feel like, is even more valued now because, think about it. You're like, oh, is that a real person or is that AI, right? So just keep that in mind. For me, it's a sometimes, or no, be authentic. All right. So let's talk a little bit about networking. So why is networking important? All right. Something you should be aware of is that networking, if it doesn't get you your first job, it's likely going to get you a future job. It is the number one way, maybe not to find a job, but to secure a job. So I'll tell you a brief story. So I was a part of an AI conference last fall, and they brought different employers from like Delta, McKinsey, NCR, others. And I've worked in career services, as I shared earlier, for 18 years now. And I've worked with very bright, very sharp students. And I said, I work with students who want to be the 0.001% that actually gets the job with you. But you've got all these applicant tracking systems, AI, that are filtering resumes out now to make it more manageable for you when you receive thousands of applications for one job. How do students stand out? And it validated my opinion. So I'm going to share it with you. And he said, network with me. The panelists, I should say, network with me, talk to me at the career fair. If I've got an info session on campus, again, stop by. These little things make a difference because I've got thousands of people to consider. You want to be the one that I notice that you get pushed forward into the interview or hopefully secure the role. So one panelist also mentioned, message me on LinkedIn. I'm not a recruiter, but if you know that I'm an alum or we have something in common, you're trying to break into the field, if you ask for something little, like, can I have 10 to 15 minutes of your time? I'd love to learn more about your background, any advice you have for someone trying to break into the field. If you ask for something little, many times people are willing to help, in particular if you reach out to an alum, okay? Don't ask to shadow somebody for a day. Personally, I would not like it if someone said, can we go to coffee? It's like, well, I don't know you. That's kind of a big commitment. I'm taking off time from work, definitely not dinner, okay? But you can send messages and you could even say, do you have any advice for me? If we can't chat over video, via video or over the phone, maybe share some information or tips with me via email. I greatly appreciate it. The worst thing that's going to happen is they don't respond, okay? You have lost nothing. We've got to reframe the way that we think from what if something negative happens to something more like discovery or wonder. What if something does happen? What if I do get this great insight? What if I do get noticed by whatever insert awesome company or organization you want to work for? Okay, so networking is critical. Even if it doesn't find the first job, it may be the reason why people pick you for the first job. So networking, I think of it as kind of a three-step process. So number one, as you're thinking about networking, have a clear goal in mind when you're talking to professionals. So are you trying to learn more, say if you're just getting started in your career, about careers in consulting, careers in insert any particular field? Do you want to explore graduate programs? Do you want to really break into this really innovative field and you're not quite sure how to do so? Or it might be, hey, you're doing these great things at Google or whatever the company is. How did you do that? That's a great way to network, okay? So as you see over here on the right-hand side, I think sometimes folks think that networking is only for those that are well connected or can feel smarmy, if you will, or inauthentic. So good networking is just relationship building, and it's being respectful and it's being planful and mindful around your conversation. So you already have a network. If you're going into courses, your classmates, your professors, reaching out to alumni, the larger community, thinking about your personal, either family members, friends, all of these folks can assist you along the way. But that's where that goal in mind, I think, is so important. Over the years, I've had students say, Laura, I really want a job. Okay, well, what kind of job? There's some in architecture, there's engineering, marketing, research, public policy. What kind of job are you looking for? So until you give some specificity, I have jobs come across my desk all the time. So I don't know what to share with you, but if you said, I really want to go into architecture, I just think it's such a great field, this is what I'm studying, et cetera. Next time I see an architecture job, I'm going to forward it to you, right? So even thinking about your contacts, if you give them a little bit of information, you are essentially creating what I think of as an army of job seekers. People inherently want to help other people many times. So if you let folks know what you're looking for, give some sort of parameters, you're more likely to hear about more things because more people understand what you're looking for. So with networking, again, we all have the power to create our own networks. Don't think that, again, you just have to inherently have them. You can build them at any point in time. So you can research people of interest. LinkedIn is the number one place, of course, to do that. But I do encourage you, as you're networking, try to stay organized in some way, shape, or form, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, like here's this person I met, here's where I met them, here was the topic of conversation. So that way, like say if you met someone at a career fair and maybe you weren't eligible yet for that position, you need more skills or you need another year of academic training. Okay, well, if you come back and talk to them later by being able to say, oh, actually, I met with you last year and we were talking about A, B, or C, I'd love to hear, more about, this current position that I'm interested in working with you on. That little things like that can make you really positively stand out. Okay. So something that I also think folks may not really understand in the networking piece is that networking is not asking people to do things for you. Like, can you get me a job? I once worked with a very prominent VP in a top financial firm who was fantastic. She was in an alumni directory to where if students wanted to connect with someone in a particular field, like you could reach out to this person directly. And unfortunately, I got a call from her one day saying, Laura, can you help take me out of the directory? Because I can't tell, I don't know what it is right now, but I've had way too many students recently, call me up and say they want to do an informational interview and at the end they say, can you forward my resume to HR? It's like, don't do that, especially senior level folks. If somebody wants to submit your resume to HR or put in a good word, however you want to phrase it, they're going to do it. You should not ask for somebody to do that because you're, especially somebody you don't know. If you don't know them well and you ask that, you are going to get the opposite of what you're asking for. You're more likely eliminating yourself from consideration because it's viewed as a violation of etiquette, if you will. Like you don't understand that that's a really big ask of somebody, okay? But with networking, another thing that kind of trips people up is that it doesn't have to be very mechanical. It doesn't have to be, what are you hiring for? What is the timeline? Da da da, very focus on the particular topic at hand. Folks that are good at networking understand how to build rapport. And if you're networking at career fairs or, at professional conferences, poster sessions, wherever it is, many times it's little things that make you memorable that have nothing to do with the specifics that you're talking about. So being friendly, asking good questions, showing that you're interested in the conversation, not just sitting here scrolling through your phone or like looking for someone else more important to talk about. There's a lot of different research out there that shows that when it comes to people securing a position through networking, sometimes it's not even just the people that directly, it's the people's it's kind of a connection or two in between. And why I bring that up is that your professional reputation is getting established, and you don't have control over all of it. You are through your daily actions developing a reputation. Okay. So it's important for you to, be very mindful about how you're interacting, again, being kind to everybody that you meet. And again, just being able to engage in, basic small talk, like, how are you doing today? Did you have a good weekend? What brought you to this event today? What projects have you been working on this week? I'd love to learn more about your role. And then do something that I call essentially like chaining. So, oh, they told you an interesting piece of information about their particular projects. Oh, okay. Were you a blank major? How were you able to transition from this area into your current role? So again, follow the line of conversation. So that way it shows that you're listening and you're interested and you want to hear something more. Okay. And there's a link to where you can look at some additional ones, additional small talk questions. So I'm going to shoot through this relatively quickly. But email. So here's a couple of pieces that you should be aware of. There is a common expectation within the professional world that you check your email regularly and respond within 48 hours or less. Okay. Especially in the job search, your tone should absolutely lean towards more formal versus casual. If you go to the Career Center's website, we have sample correspondence. Again, look at that career education tab. One of the options says correspondence. And look through that. You want to have a nice email signature. It's got your name, your major, Georgia Tech. You're not going to be starting out, the email saying, hey, John, I had such a great time talking with you, about A, B, or C at the career fair. Don't be too casual, even if somebody that you're talking to is maybe a young alumni, for example. Again, you're not friends, so it's okay for you. I feel like hi is pretty well accepted. That's why I kind of put it in orange, green, something like good morning, this person, or hello, etc. Dear, and then, the honorific of Dr., Mrs., Miss, Mr., etc. Last name is the most formal, of course. I think for many times in the job search, that might be a little bit of overkill outside of a cover letter. But again, I would always avoid hey, because it's just a little bit too comfortable. All right. Think about what you're asking as well. So some emails require more of a conversation. Like if you have got tons of questions or a lot of things to say, you should send an email, say what you want to talk about, and try to schedule a time. Okay. Don't write an essay, but you also don't want to write a text. So if an employer reached out to you and said, hey, I'd love to schedule an interview, what does your schedule look like this week? You said, can you interview me at 2? And you didn't have an email signature, you didn't propose multiple dates and times. Again, it's not a text message conversation. It needs to be a little bit more formal, like a letter. All right. Another thing to also touch on, because I see a lot of students do that with my office, and I know that they probably do it with employers as well, is you've got to understand appropriate follow-up times. So if you send an email and it's not an emergency, even though it may feel like an emergency and you really want a job, do not email someone the very next day saying, did you get my email? It's like, maybe, but I have other emails I need to respond to as well that maybe have come in earlier. Okay. So in general, I personally, unless if it's an emergency or a very, looming deadline, I would give someone the minimum of 5 days, if not a week, to follow up, especially with higher level people. They have a lot on their plate. But with that being said, it's appropriate to follow up. So if you sent something, you didn't hear anything back, reply back to that thread and say, hello, Mr., Mrs., whoever. I'm following up on this message to make sure you received it. I'd love to, whatever you're trying to get them to do, I'd love to hear back from you whenever you have a moment. Sincerely, your email signature, kind regards, something along those lines. Okay. And again, it's helpful to use AI to kind of things like ChatGPT or Grammarly to double check to make sure you don't have any typos or your language isn't coming across in a negative tone or demanding or anything like that. But again, authenticity is critical now more than ever. So make sure the way in which you're communicating sounds like you and it's not just overly formal, if you will. So, there's a quote from an employer and a student, students often ask, like, will they care if they receive a message from me that's a little bit more informal, like text or Facebook? And the employer responses that we received have been essentially, don't give an employer a reason to screen you out. Because keep in mind, you're going through a filter process. All right. So the more that you do right and other students may not do, the more likely that you are going to stay, on the right path for consideration while others may get screened out. So phone. All right, if you have a scheduled phone call, or especially during the job search, you're submitting so many different, applications. If you get a number coming in, you don't know who it is. When you pick up the phone, if you can, say if it's you're not in class or at work or doing other things, you should pick it up and state, hello, this is Laura Garcia. Don't just open it up and say hello. Someone will go, hey, did I reach da 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 person? Yes. Again, first impressions are critical. So the more that you do little things like this, it just elevates, the perception of you. All right, make sure that your voicemail is set up. It's not full. That's a big thing that happens to recruiters where they try to call you, they try to set up an interview. If your voicemail's full and they've got a lot of other people to pick from, they're not going to call you back. So just keep that in mind. And when you're leaving that message, provide all the information, because depending on if it's an office line that you called or a cell phone, don't assume that all the information is together that they need. They may not know which phone number to call back because they had a lot of calls from various people. So include your name, the basic information of who you are, how you all met. Why are you calling? Is it to follow up on something? Is it to schedule an interview? Is it whatever? Make sure that you restate your name and your phone number. Okay. So mine would be, hello, this is Laura Garcia. We met at A, B, or C. I was calling today because I heard that I heard your message and we need to set up an interview time. Here are several dates or several blocks of time next week that I'm not in classes or have other obligations. I look forward to talking with you soon to schedule that. Again, my name is Laura Garcia. My phone number is blah, 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 blah. Right? Okay. So that's essentially what it would look like. Just be sure that, again, you're not bombarding people with multiple calls, emails, anything like that. Okay. All right. Oops, sorry, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. Get us to the next slide. So video and social media. So Google Gemini is great, by the way. This is a generated image. This person does not exist. It's a fictional student. But I wanted to show up a visual of the experience that many recruiters have, okay? Where they'll call you, they're doing a Zoom or a Teams call to interview you, usually in the first round of interviews, or they're setting up a conversation. And I can't tell you how many times I've like gotten on calls and gone, why is there an unmade bed in the background? What is that poster about? Use a virtual background or pick something very generic in the back. Don't have lots of people walking behind you. Or again, you have to keep in mind that little things make a big difference in the job search. So don't give them any sort of reason to screen you out. Okay. Be mindful of noise, be over prepared. Even if you anticipate, nobody coming by your apartment or where you live, have headphones on hand because you never know. It might be that day where somebody decides to mow the lawn right outside your window. Some other etiquette things to think about: make sure that you're very aware of how you are publicly presenting yourself, whether it's through LinkedIn. You should always Google yourself to monitor your online presence because someone's probably going to Google you as well. So let's go into just some general professional etiquette. I'm going to zoom through this pretty quickly because I want to ask, or I want to be sure I can answer any specific questions that you all have. So these are baseline expectations for professionals in general, especially as you start the job. So just keep that in mind. So this is big for folks that are, I think of them most often as interns, that instead, if you're given a project or an assignment, before, going immediately to your manager and asking the question, Google it, try to look it up, try to find it. So if you go back to this individual, you can say, I tried to find this in our company database. I looked, in this particular area to try to find the answer to my question, but I'm not finding it. Can you help me with blank, 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 blank? That looks much better than, how do you do this? Or where can I find blank? First off, another etiquette thing that I would strongly recommend is don't go to senior level people to ask basic questions. Ask your colleagues first for basic questions, because otherwise you're leaving the impression that you aren't showing initiative to find the answer to your question. Okay. Or you don't look like you know what you're doing. Okay. So that's just one insight that I'd like to share. In general, make sure that you're being respectful with people's names, pronouncing them correctly. If you even, get into a search engine, you search for people's names, there's a lot of content out there where you can just click play and hear the pronunciation. It's just respectful. All right. Make sure that you always arrive early and prepared. You've got pen and paper. When I was in my I'm not proud to say this, but when I was in my 30s, I was in a particular job and I showed up for a lunch meeting with someone I was working with, and we were discussing a couple of different things. And he said, "Did you not bring pen and paper?" I said, "Well, no, actually, I didn't think to do that." He's like, "Just so you know, I'd strongly recommend for any future meeting like this, you always do that because it just makes you look prepared." And that wasn't really easy to hear in the moment, but it was a good piece of advice that I carried with me. So a couple other things, make sure that you're being careful. Some companies like to invite students out to happy hours or like evening receptions, whatnot, and there may be alcohol involved. And if you are of age, you are, able to partake if that's something that you would like to do. But keep in mind that even if you are in casual settings, you should not act casually and not get overly comfortable. Because again, there are analogies being drawn between who you are and how you're acting and how you would actually act if they hire you. Okay. And usually they think it's even worse than some kind of minor infraction. Okay. Or even better than, the baseline that you're presenting to them. So just be careful of that. All right. So, and just in general, trying to be as positive as possible will be well received, not fake positive, if you will, but in general, trying to maintain positivity, in particular through the job search, I think is very helpful. And in particular, as you get started on a particular career. So you're getting a copy of these slides. This is way too much information for me to go through, but we don't often really talk about dining etiquette. So I wanted for you to at least have this. I know, my screen is covering the place setting, if you will. My face will not cover that, obviously, when you get that. But a couple of things that I would recommend, because I often either observe them, these kind of faux pas, if you will, or hear from employers that students struggle with this. So number one, and this can be differences of the ways in which folks grew up. Don't talk while you're eating. Don't talk when there's food in your mouth. It's just in general very negatively received. So please be careful with that. Also, there's some other kind of unspoken things, as it's a little bit difficult if you're interviewing. It's a interview over lunch, but try to keep pace with other people while you're eating. Just be mindful of that. Do pick things that are easy to eat and don't pick the most expensive item on the menu unless if you are encouraged to do so. Because if you're interviewing over a lunch, you're probably not going to be able to eat that much, to be honest, because you're probably going to be talking more than anyone else. So just keep that in mind. Definitely have a hearty breakfast that morning going into an interview. So a good general piece of advice, if you go to a very formal dinner or reception, anything like that, the outside in rule is always really helpful. And somebody once taught me the kind of B and D that you can make with your hands, okay? So if you do B and you look down at your left hand, that stands for the bread is on the left-hand side, the drink is on the right. So if you ever need to remind yourself, is this my drink? Is this my bread over here? That will definitely help you. If you're sitting down, you're in front of a bread basket, for example, make sure that you're like offering to the left, passing to the right. When you're finished, you put your fork and knife on the plate, so that way the server knows that they can take that. And be kind of mindful of the napkin. I feel like that's not as big of a deal for most employers or in most settings, but kind of leaving your napkin in the chair, say if you need to step away, leaving it in your lap. Again, just not putting something overly dirty on the table or something like that. Make sure that you're not reaching across the table in front of people. Also, there was one or two other things I wanted to be sure to point out. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, this is big as well. Wait to eat until everybody gets their food. Sometimes, depending on the serving situation, may be a little bit slow. And if it's really slow, if they say, no, 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 go ahead and eat, by all means, follow whatever directions they give you. But if you get your plate first and immediately start eating, again, many folks will perceive that negatively. So just remember that everything that you do, from the small daily actions to your major professional achievements, is going to create and contribute to both your professional perception and reputation. So etiquette is critical not only to get that first job, but once you're on the job, being very mindful of the way in which you're behaving, interacting with people day in and day out. This is what's going to lead to that professional perception and reputation, in particular, thinking around the etiquette piece. So let me kind of open up for questions there. I think we might have a question that already came in through the Q&A. All right, so is this recorded? Where can I find the recording? So yes, this is being recorded. If you go to mediaspace.godtech.edu, you can search for the Georgia Tech Career Center. We have a channel with a lot of different recordings. So if you can't attend any of our workshops, just know that we have past recordings there. It takes a little bit of time for the video to render. So it'll probably be next week when I can get you a copy of the slides and the recording. All right. Let's see. And feel free to submit any other questions that you have. And again, it's up to you if you want to drop it in the chat. If you want to submit it anonymously through Q&A, I'm happy to do whichever you prefer. All right. Anything else? All right, hold on. I think I see some stuff coming in. All right, any advice for international students for finding positions that are remote? So just to clarify that question, and thank you for your kind compliment. So are you looking for positions that are remote within the US? Are you an international student not currently living within the US looking for remote roles? So, because my answer might be a little bit different. So I'll kind of speak to that in a couple different ways. So if you are an international student working within the US, depending on the nature of your visa and OPT requirements, I know for certain industries, consulting, and I'm not the best person to ask this question to be honest, at least in terms of work authorization, OIE would be better to answer that question. But I know consulting at one point in time required that, not consulting, but there was a federal rule that came into place that essentially said if you are an international student, you must be based out of one location 90% or more, essentially eliminating travel, which very much impacted the consulting industry, or at least certain consulting firms that often traveled all across the US. So that limited that. So for finding remote positions, I'm not sure if there may be some authorization pieces there. But something you may want to look into, Interstride is a really excellent resource for international students. So just Google Georgia Tech Interstride, Interstride, and you'll find it right there. So it identifies employers who have sponsored H-1B visas in the past. It's also great for students who are interested in working abroad. Like if you've always dreamed of working in England, it'll show you the resume standards there, common job boards, how to break into it. So just a couple of thoughts there. So does Georgia Tech offer a Padfolio for undergrad freshmen, or should I look for one on Amazon? I wish I could say yes. I know that the bookstore on campus, whether it's the Barnes and Noble or I think it's in John Lewis, I know that they sell them, but in terms of providing a free one, we can't do that. But there are resources on campus, and of course, you could maybe order online if you're looking for cheaper options too. All right, let me see if any other questions came in. All right, share that resource link here in the chat. So Interstride, I might have to pull that up on another screen. Julio, if you don't mind following up with me, my name is Laura. I'll drop my email in the chat, laura.garcia@godtech.edu. I can send that to you. All right, so I'm going to wait for a couple more questions to come in, but I want to be sure, as we wrap up our conversation today, kind of know a little bit more about the Career Center and how we can help you. Okay, so here's some of the topics that you can see on the screen we can talk to you about. Here's our website. We've got drop-in hours that I mentioned. You can schedule appointments in person or virtual. So if you're not close to campus or you're an online student, know that you have the ability to schedule appointments. And like I said in the beginning, for those that were here at the very beginning of the call, we're always trying to revise our content. We want to talk about things that are valuable to students. So would love to see the evaluation that you have. Would love for you to fill that out, share your feedback, any suggestions you have for future content for us to cover. One or two other quick things. I also want to let you know in the presentation slides, we've got a lot of other helpful slides that may help you that go beyond etiquette. Okay. And I'm going to end this with my contact information. So if you have any questions after today, know that you're always welcome to reach out to me. I'll stop sharing now. All right. And I think we're about at the end of time. So folks need to hop off, get to their next thing. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I love talking about this topic and lots of different career topics naturally. But I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Be safe this weekend. Hope you enjoy it. And keep in touch with the Career Center. Our job is to get you a job. So make sure you take advantage of our resources. We love working with our students. So hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you.